Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. I am really looking forward to bringing you my conversation with TJ Labinsky, the man who built his own Collinwood. But before we get to the show, I want to express my condolences and well wishes to all of those who lost their homes and who lost loved ones in the Los Angeles fires. It's just heartbreaking watching the news and seeing all of the devastation, and I do know friends who have lost homes in that fire. So my deepest sympathies and best wishes to all. I also wish to express sympathies to Michael Orlando Yacarino. Michael is a big supporter of the show and such a nice guy, and so was his life partner, Scott D. Ryerson. And for those who don't know, Scott was a brilliant author and illustrator who designed many iconic movie posters and ad campaigns for films such as Silence of the Lambs, Pet Sematary, Changeling, Children of the Corn. He passed away last May, and both Scott and Michael were listeners of the podcast and supporters of the podcast through Buy Me a Coffee. And I hear from Michael, he's going to be on the show at some point, but I'm very sorry, and I've been wanting to mention this for a little while. I also want to let you know about a couple things that are going on before we get to the show. There's some news in the Dark Shadows world. Mark your calendar. Catherine Lee Scott has posted an update about the Lyndhurst weekend for 2025, and it says, here's an early bird alert for our 2025 Lyndhurst weekend, July 19th through the 20th. We're still making plans and tickets won't go on sale yet, but here's a heads up in case you're making vacation plans. The weekend will include meet and greet sessions, a Saturday evening cocktails at Collinwood with small bites and drinks in the mansion and on the lovely veranda. Photo opportunities with original props and furnishings from the Dark Shadows set. Holy moly, that's cool. Rare access to the Tower Room, landscape tours of DS locations on the Lyndhurst grounds, and special surprise guests. So stay tuned. So there's that. Really exciting news there. Also coming soon from Hermes Press, announcing the newest Dark Shadows project, the Paper Doll book, expected to arrive in April 2025. This book has 96 total pages with 48 pieces of art, leaving space for you to cut out the dolls and all their accessories. Featuring 33 characters from the show, this is the only authorized edition of its kind. It's going to be $24.99. It's now available for pre-order, and the artwork is by Samantha Lomusio O'Neill, who you heard back in the Dark Shadows coloring book episode. She, of course, is the illustrator for that book as well. So the Dark Shadows Paper Dolls book is coming soon. Keep your eyes out for that. Speaking of new books, and introducing Dexter Gaines, a novel of old Hollywood, is now available for pre-order. It's written by the dapper and delightful Mark B. Perry, who you've heard on the podcast before. So check out Mark's great new book, and congratulations, Mark, on your new novel. It is now available for pre-order over on Amazon. I'll put a link in the show notes. Now I am quite eager and excited to get to today's episode with the astounding and talented TJ Labinsky, the man who built his own Collinwood. But before we get to it, I want to remind you that you can get all of your Dark Shadows DVDs and loads of official items over at mpihomevideo.com. I probably don't mention this enough, and I should, because people sometimes ask me where I got my DVD coffin box set. And just the other day, a friend asked where I got the bobbleheads. While you can get the complete series coffin box set at places like Amazon or eBay, I recommend going right to the source at MPI. You know you're going to get the real deal official release, because there are a lot of bootlegs out there. You want the real deal, you want to go to the source at MPI, and they often have sales, including right now, actually, as of this recording at least. So you can get the whole series, you can get individual DVD sets, you can get the bobbleheads, the complete musical score on CD, and more. Lots more items over at mpihomevideo.com. The link is in the show notes. And now, let's get to the show. Twinge of fear and tears that glisten There are spoilers here for those who listen. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. 'Tis I, Penny Dreadful, and oh yes, I am very excited because I am joined by TJ Labinsky, who is a television, radio, and digital media host who has long been associated with oldies and Motown music. He is also a creator, director, and executive producer, best known for his work on PBS's Pledge Drive programs and for music programs such as Rock, Rhythm, and Doo-Wop and My Music, Doo-Wop, Pop, and Soul Generations that tell the stories behind the songs of yesteryear. He helped bring several episodes of Doctor Who to the United States, which had not been shown in the country before. TJ is also finally revealing his identity publicly, although some Dark Shadows fans already know him as the man who built his very own Collinwood. Welcome to the show, TJ.
Oh, Penny, it's delightful to be with you. And yeah, just a little bit of a fan here.
For those listening to the audio version of this, if you check out the video version, TJ is sitting in front of the paneled wall with the Barnabas painting in the background and the original candelabra from the set of from the foyer of Collinwood. That is the real deal, right?
Except for the light bulbs, they don't make the orange ones anymore. That would have been really legitimate.
Yeah,
Not you can get the ones that are translucent, but you don't get the opaque orange ones anymore.
yeah.
And I tried to find them everywhere, and so yeah, they're white. So other than that, yeah, it's as close as you can get to being in that foyer at
That that's amazing. What are you up to? I see you're hosting a show called Labinsky Live with TJ Labinsky on Mixcloud.com. What's that all about?
a lot of music. I'm a television producer, director, writer, um, chief bottle cook and washer and all that sort of stuff. Lucky enough to have now been celebrating 35 years in public television. I started very young.
Yeah.
And so my passion was really fundraising for public television, but I also love music at the same time.
Mhm.
So for me, it was a chance to bring music back with the original artists of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Um, we didn't get the Randolph Orchestra yet, but just about everybody else has come back to perform. And it's just a passion. So I do every Friday night we do a show on Mixcloud and Facebook and Live 365 to play the requests of the original recordings that I can't always do on television. And then on television, I've been involved with everything from the Ed Sullivan Show to you name it, hullabaloos, shindigs,
Sure.
and making my own specials for all these years. So it's a lot of fun and it's a great passion. But my personal passions, um, first and foremost, classic Doctor Who, particularly
Yeah.
with Tom Baker, introduced by Howard Da Silva, which Doctor Who fans will know what that means. Um, and Dark Shadows. I love Dark Shadows, and I love classic television. But Dark Shadows, very special place in my
Yeah.
heart.
Now, we're the same age, and when it comes to the original Dark Shadows, I always quote Maxwell Smart in the original airing. Missed it by that much.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
was just missed it, you know. So, but then of course, luckily, I had my uncle Valdemar, who I've mentioned many times on the podcast. He introduced
Valdemar.
Valdemar, yes, Uncle Valdemar, that's his name. And we call him Uncle Val for short, but he was he came to America with my family from Portugal in the 60s, and he got into Dark Shadows right away. So he introduced me to it when I came around in the early 70s. It was like from birth immediately, like throwing Barnabas info my way and pretending to be Barnabas. He was like all, so I got sucked into Dark Shadows and started watching the syndicated broadcasts, bootleg tapes that were multi-generation recorded in the early 80s. And so how did you discover Dark Shadows? How did you find your way into it?
Well, I'll tell you, there's different strands to that story, but to go back to the beginning, as I mentioned, I was a very big Doctor Who fan.
Mhm.
And at a very young age, I would go to the TV stations that would air Doctor Who. Sometimes they were commercial stations. And I was more a collector of the actual series itself.
Mhm.
So as I wanted to be in television all of my life, it's all I ever wanted to do was be in television, work in television. I would always hang out at these various TV stations. So at a very young age, there was a point with classic Doctor Who with the Tom Baker episodes where an actor by the name of Howard Da Silva did these introductions that were unique to America. And I wanted to find these more than anything. The BBC had destroyed them here in America. And they just resonated with me for some reason. And I went to a TV station which had the switcher, which is, basically the way you mix the pictures together. Because they had particular white patterns that were used when these were edited. They were like diamond shaped patterns and sawtooth patterns and folding Venetian blind patterns. And it was only part of a Grass Valley switcher. The only one who had it was this station, who I was talking to the program director, and I said, it would be really wonderful if we could bring back something like Dark Shadows, because I grew up around 15, 16, 17 years old at the time when in New Jersey, we had New Jersey Network, which would run the episodes. And then I would spend my winters in South Florida and my winters in South Florida, my summers in New Jersey. So in New Jersey, we also had WNYC Channel 31, which was kind of owned by the city of New York. And when NJN's cycle of episodes ended, Channel 31 picked up with where NBC left off. They couldn't run the original 130 because NBC had reran those and then stopped showing it. And so they picked up with 131. When I say 131, I mean from Barnabas's introduction, because at that point, the first and final years weren't available for domestic television syndication. And so it was just an incredible experience. For starters, as much as I want to say it was Jonathan Frid, for me, it was Grayson Hall.
Hall, yeah.
She was everything. I mean, she was everything.
She was awesome, yeah.
I ever wanted to know. I mean, I had a kind of a crush on her at a young age because she had the bob going.
Yep.
And
this is when she's first, comes onto the show, right? When she's trying to cure Barnabas.
Yeah, well, I guess for the few episodes she was not cast yet, so they were still referring to him.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, sure.
With that great bob.
Yeah.
And that great, oh my God,
that the hair.
All the hair, the voice.
Yeah.
I mean, the cheekbones. She
most
had
unique person, and everybody on that show just had such a distinct look, but she especially did. Yeah.
I just loved her. I loved everything about her. I feel the same way about B. Arthur, by the way, very much. In fact, I say to my wife sometimes, "Listen, honey, can't you put on the long vest and just say God will get you for that, Walter?" Just so B. Arthur is Maud. I want to clarify.
Yes, Maud.
I was lucky because I was getting involved with public television at that time. NJN, I was friends with the people who ran the fundraising department.
Yeah.
And, it was a strange scene there because people got all upset and they picketed the governor's mansion when they had to stop running the episodes. But it wasn't their fault because the show was only released in cycles. And at that point, the fourth year just wasn't available to them. It's not like they were trying to take the show away from fans.
Yeah.
They couldn't buy it. They tried to buy it. It was popular.
Yeah.
But World Vision wasn't offering those episodes because they had to pay AFTRA, SAG, and musicians and everybody else for these cycles of 130 episodes. And so it created a really bad scene. I mean, I was there the day that all these Dark Shadows fans were kind of picketing the governor's mansion. And it was, it didn't do the shows a lot of favor. I wish it could say it was fans coming together and doing all that, but instead, the state of New Jersey said, you're supposed to be educational television. How is this education? And it kind of, I think, cemented Dark Shadows not continuing it on JN because it could have probably gone further. But because of the scene that was made publicly, there was no way the state of New Jersey, which owned New Jersey Network at that time, was going to continue showing those shows. It just, unfortunately, the fans, as much as we like to be part of it and we like to stand for the cause and do all that stuff, it wasn't like a petition. It wasn't a friendly thing. It was very critical
Right.
And
People were asking for their pledges back and things like that, as I recall. But I thought it was when they took it off prior to this last cycle that was available, and then they brought it back. But this was for the last year that they just didn't, because,
it was the rights problem. I mean, I was there
yeah.
because I knew the
Hmm.
fundraising people, I knew the program directors, and it was all an issue with World Vision getting them the rights.
I see. Okay.
And it only at that point it only happened because there were based on NJN's success with the show in
Hmm.
fundraising, not so much in ratings, but in fundraising.
Hmm.
Others PBS stations started to pick up the episodes,
Yeah.
uh, like New Orleans, and then of course eventually it ended up on WNYC, and WNYC kind of continued the story where NBC had left off showing the episodes in the
Gotcha.
afternoons.
Yeah.
And so, NYC, I knew them very well. I knew the programming people very well. I knew the fundraising people very well. Again, I was a young kid trying to break into television. So I would just go and hang out at these stations and do anything. I'd sweep the
Yeah.
floor, whatever it took just to learn and absorb and be around. And eventually that led me to being able to thread up the tape machines and, see the slates and all that kind of weird stuff that nobody else got to see.
Sure.
And it was around the time that Jim Pierson was able to get the series with Dan put out on VHS
Hmm.
as well. And so, I really was lucky because we had NJN running the show. And as soon as NJN finished the show, when I came into it, WNYC aired the show and it was stripped every night. It was like 8 to 8:30 every single night. And so I got to see 1795, which is probably still my favorite storyline of them all.
Hmm.
And then moving into Adam and Eve, and then moving into Quentin and all that sort of stuff. It was really, and then moving to the Leviathans. I,
I could see by your facial expression that that is not your favorite storyline.
it was okay. It was all right. But it was just Barnabas's whole thing was a little weird.
Yeah.
But I just love, God, did I love Grayson Hall and Jonathan Frid. I mean, he was just
Mhm.
incredible. And I also, being from New Jersey, I love Joan Bennett.
Oh,
And
sure.
we all knew the Bennett sisters, it was Constance and Joan Bennett,
Yeah.
and they were kind of famous locally in Asbury Park, where I'm from,
Uh-huh.
as like stars of New Jersey.
Wow.
So it was really wonderful to discover the episodes. I saw them for the first time like somebody would have seen them in the first run. It was just later for me.
That's, yeah. And when they aired it up here, it was similar on Channel 58. It was, except it was at the same time they used to in the 60s. It was like at 4 o'clock. So, but it was daily. Channel 58 would run it daily. And they ran it up until right before, again, they dropped it right in the middle of parallel time. So we didn't get that last year. And it was like, oh, it's so frustrating when it ended. But I did not protest in front of the government.
It wasn't that you could certainly tell stations what was going on. It was the way that particular thing went down that it
Mhm.
just, it was they were owned by the state,
Yeah,
and it just was not the way to go about it. There
sure.
was other ways to go about it, and that was the way. But thankfully we had WNYC
Yeah.
who was able to then champion it. And Jim Pierson, I'm very close with for 35 years. And I remember that wonderful, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but when they picked up with the episodes, he did sort of a recap of everything that came
Yeah, oh,
before.
sure. Yep. Mhm.
And it was just wonderful. And it really introduced you to kind of the past episodes.
Yep.
This was before we got the first season on VHS. It was before any of that stuff. And so I was lucky because I got to hang out at the station. I got to see the episodes. Then I actually got to get tapes of the episodes from the station for helping them out. Like I would help them
Wow.
out answering phones with a pledge drive or something. And they knew I drove up and had no money to drive in the city from New Jersey. And I was 15 years old. And they're like, we can't do this, but let's just say this Dark Shadows VHS is here. And, and if it disappears, no one's going to ask any questions. It was
Great.
one of
I
those
love
kind
it.
of,
I love it.
it was one of
Uh,
those kind of things. So,
I
so
love,
yeah, I'm sorry to be fanatical about it, but God, did I love Grayson Hall. And she
oh,
was,
she's
oh,
amazing. She's
oh,
amazing. I did a 55th anniversary tribute to her a couple of years back on the podcast, and we talked about all her characters and stuff. And I'd love to get her son on sometime. We had corresponded, Matt Hall. At some point, I'd love to get him. He's the son of Grayson and Sam Hall. I love that you're a big fan of Doctor Who too, because a lot of people I've had on the podcast are fans of Doctor Who. I have friends who are fans of Doctor Who, and I've tried to get them into Dark Shadows because to me it's like there isn't it isn't a far cry from like early Doctor Who, 60s, 70s Doctor Who and Dark Shadows. It's kind of very similar look to those shows and feel to those shows. And there's that long time association with PBS with both shows too, which is really interesting. They have serialized stories, although Doctor Who has the kind of the chapter, the stories, the
Yeah,
serialized within the
yeah.
stories. There's a lot of similarities there.
It was, you know, you're absolutely correct on that. And we found that when I was involved with the fundraising, a lot of times people that would come on board for Doctor Who in the surveys they would give the stations were also big Dark Shadows fans and vice
Mhm.
versa. And it's because of Doctor Who on Channel 31 WNYC that I was able to really discover Dark Shadows
Mhm.
5 nights a week. And, I remember I'd always worked since I was very young, like in restaurants and whatever, a whole bunch of jobs. I
Mhm.
quit high school when I was 14.
Mhm.
Parents supported that. They said, take a GED. As long as you get your GED, do what you want. Because I wanted to work in television, but before I could get there, I had a lot of different jobs. And so I actually had an agreement. I used to run this ice cream store in a place called Ocean Grove, New Jersey. And I had an agreement with them that I would work 7 days a week, 6 hours a day, providing I got to go home between 8 and 8:30 at night so I could watch Dark Shadows.
I love it.
And
That's
so,
great.
it was amazing because part of Dark Shadows was that, when you're from New Jersey, I don't mean this to be in a snobbish way, but the actors were the finest. They were New York stage actors.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's local, kind of what's in us,
Mhm.
right, for being from that area.
Mhm.
And so, you saw the best of the best with the show and the best of what the show could be. And I never noticed the stuff that people talked about, the dodgy effects or
Same
any of
here.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That didn't make sense to me. But um, again, it was all part of trying to get the message out to people that if you can support it, it will be there for you.
Mhm.
And very much that way on WNYC and with the other public television stations. The programmer in Louisiana, really fought hard to get that fourth year released.
Mhm.
And he was a friend of mine. He was actually the guy who used to sell Doctor Who to stations for Lionheart Television at that time. So we're all kind of in the same circles,
Right.
very much. And God, I mean, Dark Shadows to me, it's just the ultimate alluring story
Mhm.
of not just a love story, although I always thought the love story really was between Barnabas and Julia in my,
The unrequited love.
yeah, yeah, I guess it was, at first
Josette.
well, I was going to say with Victoria, right? And
Oh,
then
Victoria, sure. Yeah.
and then with Maggie and Catherine Lee Scott and all that. But for me, I always thought the two of them were the ones that always should have been together, and
Mhm.
kind of like the ending of that TV Guide piece that
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
so,
Sam Morrill.
God, I mean, and I always pine for that. I always hope for that. Never happened, but God, I hope because they were just, they fed each other's needs so well.
Yeah. But
And
Julia deserves better. I think.
yes, so,
But
yeah,
he is
because
undead.
that's the thing with with Doctor Who and Dark Shadows. Tom Baker as Doctor Who was the anti-hero,
Yep.
just as Barnabas is the anti-hero.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
And so you rooted for him very
Yeah.
much. With Doctor Who, it was more like the guy who throws his nose up to the establishment. But with Dark Shadows, you just wanted Barnabas to get over it and be normal again and have a
Yeah.
normal love relationship. And that's the way I saw it anyway. And so
Yeah.
it
Sure.
was, and I was young. I was 15, discovering girls,
Mhm.
and relationships. And so, uh, feeling the way Barnabas felt towards, Josette was kind of a longing for a relationship that I hope I would have one day. So when you start dating girls and stuff, um, you'd say, hey, what are you into? And at the time it was like 1986, 87, 88. And they'd be like into 80s music, and I was like, no, 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 no. It's about Julia. It's all about
Yeah.
Julia. You don't understand. It's Julia.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're
Right?
such a huge Julia fan. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you're not alone. Like a lot of people feel Barnabas and Julia should be together. If he were cured, like the thing with Barnabas though is that he seemed like he loved Julia as a friend, but he didn't seem to have like a romantic response to her in this because he'd always go chasing after whatever the next Josette lookalike was, or Roxanne, these young girls that would come along. Usually it was a Josette lookalike until Roxanne showed up. But you never know. I don't know.
For me, it was like, okay, he's wrong here, and he'll discover he's wrong, and he'll
he'll,
make the right decision one
yeah,
day.
he'll
That's what I had always
he'll say,
hoped.
"What an idiot I've been." Yeah, and
Yeah.
come to the realization. Sure. So I want to ask you, you sent me this great video, which you've just recently posted on your YouTube channel, and you also gave me permission to post it on the Terror at Collinwood
Oh yes.
YouTube channel. You, when you were, what, 16, got to meet and interview Jonathan Frid, and you
15
15
years old.
years old,
Yeah.
interviewing Jonathan Frid, and it's such a good interview. Frid's responses were
Yeah.
excellent. And one of, I mean, in-depth answers to your questions, really good stuff. Can you talk about that? How did that come about?
Well, okay. So for starters, I've always been someone who's very determined.
Mhm.
So generally, in most things in life, no, when someone says no, and I'm not talking about, I'm just talking about just generally in life. When someone says no, that means tell me more, right?
Uh,
uh, and I've always had that in me. And so I desperately wanted to see Dark Shadows on television again in South Florida. We had a small run of the first 130 episodes on a station called WCIX Channel 6. They were then bought by another company, and they dropped all their syndicated programming. So I tried to figure out a way anyway that we could get Dark Shadows on the air. The public television station at that point didn't really have the acquisition money for such a commitment, because to buy from World Vision, you had to commit to 250 episodes. And in a market like Miami, which is where it came from, that would have been somewhere around $1,000 an episode.
wow.
And they had to buy several runs, um, committing to a second year and a third year.
Mhm.
So it wasn't it wasn't financially feasible for them to be able to get Dark Shadows. So me being me, I was trying to think, okay, how do we get the show on the air? If it can't come through the Miami market because it's too expensive. I was driving one day between Coral Springs, where I lived, and I used to work in a diner in Plantation. And we had one station locally which was licensed to Hollywood, Florida. Now, Hollywood, Florida was like market 9,999. It was like Beetlejuice at the end of the first movie. Whatever his number was, that's what the market was. And Hollywood was right next to Miami,
Mhm.
but they had their own city of license. So I went to the salespeople at World Vision and I said, listen, I know you can't sell to Miami, it's too expensive, but I might try to do a fan thing. Would it be kind of cheap if we were able to get it on the air in Hollywood? And I'm very ballsy at this point. 15 years old, the guy's like, "And who are you again?" And and you're fit, and you just got home from school. What?
Do you just cold call the stage? Do you just cold call them to ask about it?
Probably, yeah, I cold called
Oh,
them,
yeah.
and I opened with a line which I thought was so funny. I said, "I know you're not affiliated with any religious or," I used to say on their logo. Um, And the guy got a kind of kick out of me, and he said, "Yeah, you're right. It would be a demarcation for us, and we could probably sell it to him for $25 an episode, because they're
Wow.
such a small market. Even though they went into Miami and they went into Fort Lauderdale and they went into Palm Beach, over the air, they were just a small station. Then at that time, we had a low power station that was starting up in West Palm Beach a couple years after that. And again, I wanted to see Dark Shadows come to the air. I was at the PBS station, tried to bring it on the air several times. The problem was Sci-Fi had it exclusively during that time.
Mhm.
So it wasn't available for local syndication. They pulled the local ability to buy the show. However, when the Sci-Fi deal ended, I had left the PBS station there, and we were able to get the low power station to be able to run the episodes. And again, low power, it was like $20 an episode or something. It was perfect, and they could go back and start with the black and white first Barnabas episode,
Oh.
which because they were a different market from Hollywood, not the first episode, but the first Barnabas
Oh,
episode,
the first Barnabas episode. Okay, yeah.
which hadn't been seen in South Florida. So, it was kind of ingenuity, I think, to try to get the show on the air any way we could.
Yeah.
And so, again, I was talking to the program director. I said, what do I have to do to get you guys to pick up Dark Shadows?
No,
And this
you
is
were
when
you were not working for the station. You were a fan
I,
as far as they knew to
fan on
Colin.
steroids, fan on
Okay.
steroids.
Okay. Okay.
And you know what that's like, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. Indeed.
um, like like I never took it. I mean, I guess, you know what that's like. So anyway, I just was determined to get the show on the air, regardless. No matter how it had to be on the air, I was going to get that show on the air. And so I was working with Doctor Who, editing at this commercial station in town, which had this video production switcher. And I got to know the programmer. I said, look, I'm going to have a little thing in South Florida. Now, I haven't talked to anybody about this because it's a little bit of an embarrassing story, but, I might as well tell you because I haven't told anyone. Um, I thought, okay, if we can get someone from Doctor Who to come in and we get someone from Dark Shadows to come in, maybe I can get this guy's attention to invite him to come down and see that there's a group of South Florida fans that would like to see the show on the air.
Mhm.
The guy's name was Mike. I remember the program director. And he said, all right, if you can get a couple hundred people in a room, that'll prove to me that a TV sample would be a few thousand people or more. We only sample 200 people in our survey. So if you can get 200 people there, I can go to my boss and say, we'll buy, Dark Shadows and we'll put it on before Mary Tyler Moore at 11 in the morning. So I invited Catherine, but again, I was very young. I had just turned, I think, 14
Mhm.
and knew nothing about running a convention, knew nothing about having guests fly in. And God, I mean, I remember it was such an embarrassing situation because I remember we were relying on the gate to be able to pay people their agreed fee. And the gate, like, was enough to cover the rental of the convention room, but it wasn't enough to pay anybody. So I remember, having to go to her and say, I'm sorry, we thought, and she was very gracious and nice about it. Um, but it was like a typical boyish going into puberty, wanting to do something big, but it really was all designed to get the attention of getting the show on the air.
Yeah.
As it turned out, the program director came down that day and he saw the audience. And he said, "You got it. We'll get the first cycle of episodes."
Great.
And and it worked. I mean,
Yeah.
it was not the way to do it. It wasn't the way I'd go about it. It was a great learning lesson in life that I try to forget because it was so embarrassing and just wasn't planned right. I didn't have the right people around me, and you would never do anything like that ever in life. But at the time, I was just thinking about getting the show on the air, very tunnel vision,
Mhm.
and this did accomplish that goal. Um, and so, it was amazing because within 6 months they were showing the first Barnabas episode, which hadn't been seen for a long time, hadn't been seen in New York on the reruns, and so it was really great. And so it was about determination for me. It was really about trying to get the show back on the air,
Mhm.
and that's sort of how it all began for me. That was my real beginning with Dark Shadows.
Yeah.
Aside from really being a fan of the storylines, maybe not Adam and Eve so much. I mean, it went on a little long, right? It went on a
It,
long
it was
time.
a long storyline. I love all the Dark Shadow storylines. I have to admit, I'm one of those that's like I can always find something to love in every storyline. But yeah, I love, but I know what you mean.
Coming off of 1795, there was nothing. And again, you talk about Doctor Who parallels. It's because of the time travel. That's
Mhm.
one of the things. If you like time and going back in time, the thing that got me into Dark Shadows was not so much the vampire thing. It was the alluring gothic longing
Yes,
for this
sure.
older world and this older time and love stories. But really, it was about being able to go back in time, and if you could be with the same group of people, whether you projected on them that these would be you in a previous life or a past life, and these were, may have been your sister or your brother. It was kind of I mean, I'm half Jewish, half
Mhm.
Methodist, but probably have a Buddhist philosophy. So I guess I'm a Jubu, as Mandy Patinkin says often. Um, and
It,
so
mhm.
to me, it was about, discovering spirituality and reincarnation and my beliefs in reincarnation. And Dark Shadows really showed that, particularly with
Yeah,
actors like Thayer David or Louis Edmonds or,
sure.
it was like all these relationships are the same. Everybody is the same. Everybody you've met before, and you'll meet again, but they're in all these different relationships and sort of learning levels of life.
Yeah.
And that, I think, over anything is what really got me into Dark Shadows, particularly ghosts. I mean, I'm into um and ghosts, you talk about ghosts, they come really where they came from was um English literature. That's when they
Sure.
became famous. People were longing to go back to the past, and that's where suddenly you have
Yeah.
this
I
amazing
I
thing.
love that you described the longing in the show. That is an aspect of the show that a lot of people don't mention very often, but it's very true. There's a romantic longing for the past. And it's built into the show. And I think a lot of subsequent iterations of Dark Shadows don't seem to capture the 91 series, I think did, but like the comics that I just did an episode on the Dynamite comics, and that kind of element is lacking. It sort of elevates your perception of that world. It's just kind of you get sucked into that.
And if you had been there, I'd always felt like I had been in that
Mhm.
world somehow.
Mhm.
And I remember going to a psychic one time, and I said, "What is it about this house that
Mhm.
I'm compelled to build it again? I feel
Mhm.
compelled to build this house again." And psychic, to take it for what it's worth, whether you believe it or don't believe it or whatever. Um, this person said you lived in a very similar house, but you didn't live in the house. You were always a visitor of the house.
Huh.
And someday you said if you could come back and be part of that, then I think that was part of that connection to me.
Interesting.
Was
Wow.
was particularly Seaview Terrace was
Yeah.
just like I had been there before. The
That's
balustrades, the balustrades were so familiar to me on
yeah.
the porch, and the kind of the Romeo and Juliet window boxes that they had in the
Right.
hallway, in
Yeah.
the great hallway when you go there, as I know you've
Mhm.
been there many times.
Sure.
And so it was kind of these little pieces of memories of what had been, and Dark Shadows sort of put all that front, and it was like, what was that movie that Robert Downey was in? And I think it was
Oh,
Sybil Shepherd, and he
yes.
didn't get the shot, and he remembered his past life because they
Yeah.
didn't give him this shot when he went to heaven or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And it was like these little pieces were coming back to me with Dark Shadows that I had never discovered in myself, and I couldn't have known because I was too young to know what those issues were. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, um, uh, family, family business with a history, but it's not the same as it was. And I lived in Ocean Grove, New Jersey, which was at the time they call it God Square Mile. It was an all Victorian town,
Mhm.
and so every house looked like it could have been a mini version of Collinwood.
Oh, cool.
They all had the witch's
Wow.
hat, and they all had the
Yeah.
the kind of the Queen Anne Victorian style. So that was
Huh.
every day for me, living in that
Yeah,
world.
yeah. Interesting.
And I
Wow.
worked in nursing homes and things like that too. And so there was always this longing to go back to like 1795, the 1800s. That just always appealed to me. And the
Sure.
show just, it gave a voice to what I was feeling.
There is that. I always had that longing for the past too. Especially the 19th century. I've always felt like very drawn to that, and Dark Shadows, but also the 18th century too. And yeah, Dark Shadows definitely captured that in such a compelling way. Before we talk about building Collinwood, because I mentioned
Oh, you asked about
meeting
Jonathan.
Jonathan
Yeah,
Frid. I want to hear about
so
how
all
that
right,
happened.
so I was determined to get the show on the air,
Mhm.
and the final clincher was the guy who was the programmer said, "All right, look, kid, you've done good. You show there's some interest here, but if you're really good at like I think you're probably good, get Jonathan Frid to do something for us, a promo or anything." And saying it's coming back to South Florida. As it happened, Jonathan had his one-man show he was touring with. He also had Fools and Fiends
Mhm.
at that time, and Mary had two or three shows going with him
Yep.
that he was just putting on the road. He was playing the local library. So this was very much synchronicity.
Yeah.
All this was going on at the
That's
same time.
amazing. Wow.
And I literally looked in the Sun Sentinel, the Fort Lauderdale Sun Sentinel, and it said, Jonathan Frid appears today at Fort Lauderdale
What are
Library.
the chances? That's amazing. Wow.
As I had just gotten off the phone with the programmer, trying to convince him, look, I'll go out, I'll try to find someone to buy commercials in this. I'll help you any way we can to try to get money so it falls to the bottom line. I understood the business of television at a young age, and I knew they needed to make a profit, but I thought if at least we get the episodes paid for, that would make anything they were doing in the commercial parts of the episodes fall to their bottom line. It was a win-win for everybody. 11 o'clock in the morning was the time of day, which wasn't a risky time for them. And so I understood his sensitivities. And so while this was going on, this article comes out, Jonathan Frid, and because I had known the show pretty well by that point and still wanted to get it on the air, um, I called Mary and I said, "Look, I'm going to start a little fan club here. It hasn't started up yet. Just a little fan club here for people in Fort Lauderdale, so we can kind of help support Dark Shadows grow in this area, and we'll help promote whatever Jonathan's doing." She said, "Well, why don't you give him a call? Here's his hotel." And here's his name, whatever his name was. It's like Bromwell or something, something like that. And and I called him at the Holiday Inn, which was in Los Olas Boulevard at the time where he was staying. And I said, Mr. Frid, and Mary, I don't think she'd set it up. I just was just, it was a cold thing. Um, I'd really love to interview you. You mean so much to um, those of us who are big fans of the show Dark Shadows, but are fans of you. I was very careful to let him know it wasn't just Dark Shadows.
Sure.
It was about him and his talent and his gravitas and his ability
Yes.
to,
Yeah.
to just enter a room and have this, my God, this presence that was like nothing else, even though the man was totally different than that, you know. And he said, well, yeah, I mean, if you're going to talk to me about other stuff, not just Dark Shadows, why don't you come to my hotel room? And if you want to bring a recorder, and I'll talk to you. So he sensed that determination,
That's
and
so cool. Yeah.
that was the thing about Jonathan. He it was like if he found someone eager, someone willing to learn, someone who would take what he had learned from his life's experience, and he would teach you these little lessons. And I think he really opened his door, literally, uh, because he saw something or he heard something. Because he wasn't getting paid for it. It wasn't really helping. He'd already booked the show. It wasn't helping get people to go to the show. I think he saw something that he thought was a teachable moment.
Mhm.
And and what I loved about that interview so much was, yes, I was this super fan trying to tamp down the fandom part of it. And learning my craft of television, just talk to him about things that a fan would understand, but also things that general public would understand. And in doing so, please share with me your life story, your life's experience. Don't just give me answers because you're probably not going to remember the answers. At that point, he wasn't all that hot on Dark Shadows. He was just coming back into it.
Hmm.
He had a love-hate relationship with it, as you know,
Yeah.
um, because he didn't consider himself typecast, but he was only really known in America for this incredible role that impacted everybody. But I didn't want to go in there like not respecting all he'd been through and all he'd done, both in his directing work, as play work, his stage work. And so I think he recognized something, and he really taught me a lesson in terms of interviewing people and
Hmm.
how to really talk to people, not talk at people, not ask questions, but really connect. And somehow he saw that in me. And before I saw it in myself, and it opened and we started, I think it was maybe a 5 hour interview.
5 hours, really? Wow. So what you posted and what I'm going to post as well is just part of that entire interview, huh?
Yeah. And it was, again, the main thing was like, I told him I need promos for the station. The commercial
Right.
station's going to run the shows. So I need you to do that. So he knew that. But this really opened up the opportunity to really talk to someone. It was my first interview I'd ever done professionally,
Yeah.
semi-professionally.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, I had no training, I had no experience, but I wanted to know this guy. And so it was just great. And that's the style I use today in all my TV shows when I interview artists, um, or whatever. It's the same thing. It's just a little more refined now. Maybe I don't laugh over people giving answers,
Right.
uh, you know, certain things like that. But other than that, he was amazing. He was the most amazing. They say don't meet your idols, and I know that from you know a jaded standpoint now because you meet your idols sometimes, and it's not about their talent. It's about business or lawyers or
Yeah.
contracts or whatever. It's not about what you think it was about. With Jonathan, he was the best first idol I could have met because he really recognized that, and he would call me to task, and he would say, no, 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 no. An actor thinks this way. You're a producer, so you think that way. You're an interviewer, so you think this way. But this is what an actor is thinking.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm thinking. I'm not thinking as an actor, um, what's my motivation for the character? I'm thinking, how do I not trip over the furniture? How do I get from this side of the set to that side of the set without, losing the lighting? And then the character will come from all that. I'll
Mhm.
learn all that, but I'm not going into it with some preconceived notion. I just have to go and play myself, which
Yeah.
was a very nervous guy at the time because I hadn't done
Right.
television.
Right.
So that's who you saw. It wasn't that he was nervous because he came out of the coffin and he
Sure.
had this relate with none of that. It was I was afraid I was going to trip and fall over these huge
Right.
cameras
But it
and
translated so well into the
yeah.
character. People can check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes to the interview. Definitely check it out. He talked about, what went into the character and playing the gray areas of the character. And it was really fascinating. I love when he really just dives in and explains how he kind of put that together and how it came together. He mentioned Ron Sproat too, and it was really cool. It's a great interview. Definitely, please go check it out. Do yourself a favor and go watch that. Now you touched on it, and I want to talk about this because many Dark Shadows fans, myself included, back in 2012, when the Tim Burton movie was going to come out, there was this news story, and this guy in the Dark Shadows with a Barnabas Kane who built his very
I've
own
been
collar.
unmasked.
You've been unmasked. You have revealed your identity.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is amazing that this happened. I don't even know where to start here, but I want to ask you, Well, you touched a little bit on your motivations for doing it and why you wanted to rebuild Collinwood. And if people haven't seen it,
Oh yeah, I think I think it's still online. A lot of those things too.
okay, cool. So how did this come about? How did Collinwood 2.0 come into existence, or maybe 3.0? If we have to include Lyndhurst as well. So,
Well, let me start by saying I always mixed my passions when I even working in nursing homes or restaurants. I always mixed my passions for television into what I was doing.
mhm.
Right. So if, in other words, if we had um, a big band group come into the nursing home, right, I would make sure they had a tuba so they play the canon theme song.
That's great.
Bum, 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 bum,
I
bum.
love it.
Just so I could say tonight's episode,
Yeah.
the guy with the tuba. Um, so I used to, because it was an institution, I then was able to rent from Films Incorporated. Films Incorporated was a place you could only rent films from if you were like an industrial care facility. And so, of course, they had 16 millimeter prints of House of Dark Shadows and Night of Dark Shadows.
Mhm.
And, House of Dark Shadows I had seen years earlier on WOR Channel 9 when they used to show it. Night of Dark Shadows, I didn't see it all. And so I had these 16 millimeters shipped in, which I was able to get under the guise of working in the nursing
Yeah.
home.
And you love the
And
movies. You mentioned this before we
oh
started
God,
recording.
the
Yeah.
movies to me, Lyndhurst was at first not Seaview. Okay, it wasn't
Mhm.
Seaview. It didn't have that mystical, magical feel, but it was something else. It
Mhm.
really, to me, seemed like the place where the Collins family lived.
Mhm.
Um, it was amazing seeing the first 2 minutes of House of Dark Shadows when they start and you see him walking towards the doors. And I said to myself then, I said, one day I'm going to live there and I'm going to go there, but I'm going to live there, not knowing it was a real place or any of that sort of stuff. Maybe I knew from a Joan Bennett interview it was shot at the old Jay Gould Estates, but who knew what that meant? I mean, no one, I didn't know what that meant. I was 15. But so, back in the days when you had camera copies, you'd point a camera to the wall and
Mhm.
I'd have copies of these films. And, this was before all the episodes were out. It was before Sci-Fi Channel. So it was really my first connection to the show and in such an incredible theatrical way. Wasn't a huge fan of the ending, but everything leading up to that point, the surroundings, the atmosphere was just incredible.
Yeah.
And I always thought, Pennsylvania would be the place to live if I were to do this because of all the woods and the trees. And it was affordable. So as fate would happen,
I want to cut in. Why Pennsylvania over New England itself?
I guess I equated it with a lot of woods, and we didn't have a
Gotcha.
lot of woods in Jersey, not that
Uh-huh.
looked like that in the
Yeah.
wintertime, you
Hmm.
know. And I wouldn't have been up in Maine. I didn't know Maine. I didn't
Right.
know that area.
Yeah.
I just knew like New Jersey and Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
So I knew it had to be somewhere in Pennsylvania. And as fate would have it, I got a job from South Florida moving up to Pittsburgh. And, you know, this is how things sort of happen. So Um, I had just had my second child. I have three now. My wife was pregnant with after my daughter, my first son was born, and we needed to build a place. Now, Pittsburgh happens to be the most economical city in the country, particularly we're going back 23 years or something now.
Hmm.
Back then, you could literally buy a house here for $25,000. And so I was able to get this millage from money I had saved up from working all these years. Fortunately, I had learned at a young age to save my money and to put it in different retirement things. Um, so it wasn't actually from working at PBS. It was from everything I did prior to that, being a disc jockey in nightclubs and restaurants and everything you could imagine. From the time I was about 10 or 11 years old, I had saved and saved and saved, and that then grew and grew and grew. So in Pittsburgh, you could get millage back then for like very cheap. And I came across a property that was 10 acres, and it was exactly the woods that, you see Barnabas chasing Daphne in House of Dark Shadows,
Okay. Yeah.
or in the opening shot of Night of Dark Shadows, where they show all the trees. It was exactly those woods. And so I knew like I had this was something was pulling me here, right? And then as it happened, third child was on the way. So we needed more room from where we were living. And my in-laws came to live with us. And my parents came to live with us. And they were not quite end of life, but they were approaching their senior end of their lives. And so, they needed help and support. So what do you do as a son? And my wife, was an incredible daughter-in-law to my parents, and incredible daughter to her parents. They have to move in with us. I mean, whatever it is, we have to take care of them. And so I needed a place for them to live, but you don't want to live with your in-laws and your parents 24/7. So that's where I got the idea. Well, maybe I can have sort of an L shape
Uh-huh.
as opposed to, just a straight house where we're all driving each other crazy because we're all in each other's hair all the time, and,
Yeah.
young kids, and it would have been really tough. But I needed a place. So my choice was, do we pay to put my parents and my in-laws in assisted living? Or do we move them in with us and get support to come in so that we've got them all the time and that we can be around if anything goes wrong? Because they all had serious cancer and health issues. So that was the idea where I thought I can do an L. So again, I'm looking at the pictures of Seaview Terrace and I'm thinking, well, it's basically just an L shape with a turret in the middle.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'm a television guy, right? So I'm used to making sets. So why can't we make the facade look like the outside of Seaview Terrace? Why not? I mean, I have to build it. It's going to be built out of wood and stucco. So why not design it as the back of Seaview Terrace,
Hmm.
the opening shot of, every Dark Shadows episode? So that's was just why not? It's going to cost me money to build a house. No matter what I do, it's going to cost the same amount of money to build this house. I could use bricks and I could use cement and I could use heavy, or I could use stucco and wood and find a builder who could, in my vision, recreate exactly what the facade looked like. So the first thing I did was hop on a plane and I went to Seaview for the first time. And I took detailed pictures of everything you can imagine. I remember the first shots I took were of the two-headed lizards that were outside, next to all the windows.
Yep.
And I found someone online who would do casting. If you'd send them a picture, they'd make a plaster cast.
Oh, that's cool.
And I said, no, I don't need something that looks like these. I need these. And
Yeah.
so I took like, fancy camera, was able to get depth of field with it. And this person was able to recreate all these little reliefs that they had on the outside of the house, whether it was the balusters that mimicked the balustrades that were on the terrace part, or whether it was these little inserts or medallions or the square within the circle, the
Yep.
water tables. It really was just water tables that give it that look these things are in. And I thought, okay, well, at least I could put these on the outside of the house. But then as I'm building the house, remember, I also had a very active production company at the time. Now, you could go and spend a lot of money renting facilities to shoot television, or I could just build a studio in my house. I could build the edit facilities in my house, but I don't want them in my house, right? I want them in my house, but not in my house. So it made sense to build the second part of the house. It just made perfect sense. So I needed a place to put my in-laws. I needed a place to put my parents. I needed a place to put extended family. So we had some extra guest bedrooms so that when in-laws and sister-in-laws, brother-in-laws, and all that sort of stuff would come to stay, an extended family, they'd have a place to stay as opposed to having to pay to put them up in a hotel. So I called Jim Pierson, who, was a very close friend of mine for many years, worked on almost all my TV shows. And I said, Jim, let's, you know what? I want to build Collinwood. Since I'm building the facade, why don't it can't be exactly the same on the inside, but the rooms can look exactly the same.
Mhm.
Send me everything you have on the detail of the inside of the room. And by the way, what do you want your room to be? And he said, I said, Josette's room's already spoken for. That's going to be my wife's workspace. She works from home. So what room do you want? He said, well, I want Quentin's room.
Oh, great. Good choice. Good. Jim Pierson chose Quentin's room. I love that.
I
That's
said,
great.
no problem, Jim. You got it. So I was able to get a guy who was a very skilled artisan, but he didn't cost a lot of money. Again, it was Pittsburgh talent.
Mhm.
And the guy really believed in creating art, and he saw it as art.
Was he aware of Dark Shadows and what you were doing, or?
Very much so, yeah.
Okay.
And so I would say to him, look, I need Quentin's room,
Mm.
which isn't, it was what, four flats. And,
With Victorian wallpaper.
yeah. He said, well, we can't do the wallpaper because you don't have a budget for that. But I'll tell
Oh,
you what, I can just put some pieces of tape on it, like it's a TV set, and I can paint,
oh,
and
okay.
I'll
Interesting.
use a gold relief paint so it
Huh.
looks like, and I'll just paint. And so he charged me, I don't know, 25, $50 an hour, whatever it was,
Mhm.
to paint the walls. Now, the circle of that was really great when I went to Lyndhurst for the first time, and you learn that all those walls are canvas that's painted. There's no stone walls there. The inside is all
Huh.
painted canvas,
Uh-huh.
full painted.
Wow.
So I said to this guy, and I took detailed pictures of both the the inside of Seaview and the inside of Lyndhurst. And I said, "You're the faux guy, so let me get similar molding. It's in plastic, it's not molding, but let's paint it and use
Mhm.
really thick, old-looking Wedgwood paints. Don't make it too pretty. I want to like see that it's looks old. So if it drips, don't clean the drip up. Like let it drip." And I did it from that way, and I started a room at a time. So look, my parents needed a bedroom, so why not make that look like, um, you know, the third floor at Collinwood,
Oh,
and
cool.
my in-laws needed a bedroom because this was long term. They were staying with us, 9 months out of the year. My parents were living with us full time, and I wanted them to have a place that they could be proud of. So it was like, all right, well, look, I'll make the first floor and the second floor where my parents live, and I'll make the basement floor deeper. We'll go deeper with it, like a
Yeah.
studio height, and that's where I'll shoot the most of my pledge stuff, whether it's a band or whether it's me hosting stuff, whatever it is. I'll
Mhm.
do all that, and I'll bring the equipment in. I'll have a control room down there, and so I basically outfitted this television studio and a place for family and extended family. Plus, we had our own separate house for us and our kids. And that's really all it was. It wasn't more than that. It was just saying, okay, this is a door.
So your parents and in-laws were living in the basically in the West Wing, I guess, or the
Ex-
East Wing. Yeah.
We've had the North Wing closed for many years. um, I think I did close it for 6 months before I let anyone go in it, but just to say that it was closed for,
I love
um,
it.
I'm a little eccentric, little.
No, no. Wonderful. This is great. So I,
So
I think
anyway,
everybody fantasized about living in Collinwood, and you
but it was
actually made it happen. So
But it was just a room. It was like a room that we painted. It's all we did was we
yeah,
painted.
yeah,
You could spend a lot of money and get, a craftsman to come in and work on the wood molding,
right.
or you could buy wood molding that's plastic, that's $1.99, and paint it so it really looks like it's been there
It
100.
does look like if you people watch the news story, you can see they show some parts of the house, and you see the wood molding, but then the guy they interviewed said he took some elements even from the Tim Burton movie too one of the
Those
ceilings.
archways, yeah, that's the
Yeah,
only thing I took from the
yeah,
movie
yeah.
that I loved
But
was,
you can leave
well, I
everything
love
else.
in fairness, I loved the first 10 minutes and I love the last 10 minutes. I wish it
Same. I
would.
love the beginning of it, and the visual design of the film is. I mean, like all Tim Burton movies, it looks gorgeous, and he clearly took inspiration from Seaview Terrace as well for that Collinwood. I just wish they hadn't done it as a
What,
fish out of
I
water
was
comedy.
thinking today, knowing we were going to talk, I was thinking today, like, if I were king of the world, if I were Tim Burton, would it have killed them to shoot two movies at the same time, a straight movie and the movie he did?
Interesting, yeah.
They still would have the same amount of takes. They may have had, an extra few, to say 2 to 3 weeks of actual shooting and script work, but they could have made a straight movie and they could have made the movie he put out. And
Yeah.
then the straight movie, he could have held on for 10 years and said, this was the real Dark
This is
Shadows
the one I
movie.
wanted to. Yeah, I'd
And
heard. Yeah, yeah.
that's what they should have, I thought he should have done. And it would have been incredible. I just wasn't used to the whole comedy. I understand why he did it. And look, I saw it the other day on it's running a lot on television.
Mhm.
So I gave it a couple shots and it's amusing. It's not bad when you look at it in terms of like they're making fun of a genre and an era, and this is what they do in all their movies.
Mhm.
But it just wasn't Dark Shadows to me,
Right.
but
You're right that it is what Tim Burton tends to do. Although originally he wanted to do it from what I have a friend who had lunch with him one time. He said he wanted to do it as more like Sleepy Hollow and have it be a little more, which is I think what we all kind of wanted. But the studio talked him into doing comedy and he got on board with that and thought it would be a good idea once the studio kind of pushed. But I think, Tim Burton having been a fan, Johnny Depp having been a fan, and such a powerful duo, they could have said, "Nah, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this instead." But oh well, what's done is done.
well, if you remember though, they had that great publicity shot of the family with the arches.
Yes, that
And
was great.
that's where I stole the arches from. I said, okay, you
Ah,
know what? This movie has one redeeming factor for
yeah,
me, other than the first and the last 10
uh,
minutes. It's got, these great
yeah,
arches. And again, these things aren't difficult to make. It's basically a piece of wood with three pieces of wood stuck on them, and
right.
it's balsa wood. It's not
Yeah,
like, and it's
no,
basically just
yeah,
primed, sanded, primed, and painted.
yeah. So you're pulling elements from Seaview, Lyndhurst, and the Tim Burton Dark Shadows movie. Now,
Lyndhurst, by the way, to me that the favorite scene I had of that, other
yeah,
than the opening shot of walking in that wonderful um, kind of vestibule area that they have before you go actually into it. I love the dining room so much, and so
yeah,
I took all these detailed pictures of the actual relief work in the dining room, which was a plum dining room, and they
mm,
had these sort of half diamond shapes with a little bit of detailing going on inside it, a little bit of gold leafing. And so I had all these shots, and I took this guy who's just a painter. I mean, ironically, he ended up painting for like 6 months. He was like my Eldon. If you remember Murphy Brown, who just moved
oh,
in
right,
and
yes,
lived
yeah,
there. But he needed a place to live for 6 months. So it worked out.
yeah,
And it was great. So he was able to replicate that room perfectly. I never found that octagonal table. I wish I had, but
yeah. If somebody's listening and has that, uh,
well, yeah, now I don't know if I have space for it. But so look, bottom line is I took a lot of inspiration, both of those. The For me, the first thing that had to happen was the entranceway. The entranceway had,
that was the next thing I was going to ask you about because they showed it in that interview and you have the stained glass windows and it looks just like the foyer of Collinwood when you walk in with the stairs and everything. It's remarkable.
we had a company which is no longer in business that
Mm,
were kind of in their last stages of making leaded glass lights, windows, and stained glass lights or windows.
uh-huh.
And they needed work. They didn't have a lot of work. And I said, well, I've got, you know, literally 600 windows here if you count the transoms. And I have exact pictures of what I want them to be. If you can recreate them, then I can give you a little work. I don't have an endless
Mm,
budget. It's a Pittsburgh budget to make this, but can you do that? And they absolutely replicated every one of those window designs
so cool.
perfectly. The intricate, more detailed ones that are on some of the back doors in the entranceway, but then also kind of the half moons and the boxes, all that stuff. And it was real lead. I mean, it was real 3/4 inch lead, which is the thicker lead. Um, and then, they went out of business shortly after. So it was kind of the last part of getting someone who did that, where they actually broke up glass and did it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
I had to have windows on this thing, and there was an option to do a storm window. Well, a storm window as kind of a third layer because it gets cold in Pittsburgh. Storm window is just another window that goes over the other two windows. So a storm window may cost like say $200, but for $300, they would give me a stained glass window because they had glass they couldn't get rid of. They had to get rid of it, and you couldn't get rid of the lead because you couldn't dispose of it. So it was one of those things that it just worked out that I
That's
got the right
cool.
craftsman. And so we recreated all those windows exactly as you see them at Seaview. Where I didn't cheap out, or where I spent the money was the slate roof,
Uh-huh.
because that was exact to the original. And part of that was letting them bleed. So we had to buy the slate about a year earlier so that if you went to Seaview and you looked at them where they replaced the tiles over the years, they would be sort of different saturations. Mostly it was sort of a green
Mhm.
and a gray, but there was a lot of red mixed in there too. But the red didn't look red anymore. It sort of looked brownish because it had faded after being up there 100 years.
Mhm.
So I wanted that. So again, it was about just take all this stuff that you normally put in the house and cover up, and let's just leave it outside and let the weather get to it and put those up. So that was real. The copper was real. That was, you couldn't fake that. How I got them green is a process I don't want to get into, but I got them to look exactly the way the patina did, as if they had been up for 200 years.
So cool.
So again, I'm a detail guy.
Yeah.
Didn't have a huge endless budget. It wasn't done with an endless budget. It was just like, okay, if we just have a room and we don't use wallpaper, we don't use real wood. I mean, yeah, the walls have to hold up like a real construction would, but can't we just faux paint everything to
Yeah.
make it look as though it's real? And that's kind of what we did. And I had a guy who had 6 months off and he needed a place to stay, and so he more or less lived there. And he was able to then take what I wanted and be exacting to exactly the way I wanted it to be. Because to me, it was no different than building a TV set. And we
Mhm.
were building sets downstairs for TV shows.
Right.
He also helped me with all that. So
Uh,
it was like it was a very organic
did you
process.
do the drawing room too?
We did the drawing room. The only thing that was really specialized to the house was the TV show doors, because they were all, these connected rectangles
Yeah.
cut on a particular mitered angle.
Yeah.
And so those were all custom made. But again, you're talking about a wood door with some 2x4s over it. It's not really all that. So you could spend a lot of money on making doors, or you could just like buy some plain wood doors and just add some molding over top. That's
Right.
all. That's all it was. It wasn't.
You're bringing that
Yeah.
TV background into it, which is perfect because like you're doing it in an affordable way, but you're doing something absolutely remarkable that when you look at it, it's like, oh my God, how is this possible? But it's like the way you're explaining it, it makes total sense. Yeah.
I mean, literally, you could spend so much money on damask wallpaper
Right.
flocking, and
Yeah.
and the flocking could be velvet on the inside.
Right.
Um, or you could get some burgundy paint and a stencil. And when
Yeah.
you do the stencils, they had a red velvet paint.
Mhm.
So it's just a guy who's rolling over a stencil. That's all it
That's
is.
so perfect though. It's so
So
cool. Yeah.
unless you go up and touch it, you wouldn't really know. But
Yeah.
if you're in the room, you're, it's like anything. TV is all bullshit. So
Yeah, right.
it's TV bullshit.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really all
that's
it was.
good. I love it. No, how does you is your wife and your kids, are they Dark Shadows fans? Like how did they feel about all this?
No, my wife, not at all.
Oh,
Not at all. Appreciates that I appreciate it, but she's a Mets fan. There's certain things that we've been married for, going on 30 years now. So
Mm,
one thing that keeps us wonderfully fresh is that we're pretty much the exact opposite in most
gotcha.
things.
Uh-huh.
So she loves sports. She loves the Mets. I wouldn't know what a baseball game looks like, let alone want to sit through one. Um, and so she puts up with me doing my little dark shadows thing. Although that side of the house was very normal. That side didn't have anything fancy or crazy to it. It was just the other side that I was then able to recreate the main part of the house. The other thing I will say I took from I mean, I did take as much from the TV show I could, but realistic. So when the guys coming in and painting the walls, right? I'm like, can we hard coat these walls? Now I had to have a guy on the outside doing the stucco. And I said, look, can I pay your guy? And these were Russians guys that came and did the outside stucco in Pittsburgh. That's who does this. I said, can I pay your guys? And they were literally living in a van. Like
Uh,
they all lived in 2 or 3 vans or something. And they'd come out and they'd work on the house. And I don't know where they went at night, but basically I said, can I just have the stucco guy come inside and just hard coat the walls of sheetrock? Just put hard coat on there. And he said, yeah, we can do that. I said, great. Just one more thing.
I know what you're gonna say.
Can we break up some clamshells?
Clamshells. Yeah.
And instead of horsehair, can we get some paintbrushes and cut up paintbrush hair and
Perfect.
make it look a little lumpy when you put it on? Don't perfect it, just make it look lumpy. He says, okay, so you want me to do a shitty job purposely? Yes, that's what I want. Don't think about it. Just throw it on a wall and let it be. And that's that's what we did.
How did it turn out?
It was exact to what you'd think it was
Yeah.
in that great, wonderful set. Now we did have real wooden outlays to the cornices, the cornerstones, the bricks that go up,
Mhm.
on the side. But they really were. It was all done with stucco. It wasn't done with anything that would be, like uh, the judges paneling, as they called it, the wood paneling, is literally just a flat piece of balsa wood with 4x8s on it, and
Mhm.
it's stained. Then you paint over the stain, and then when you mix the paint with stain, which nobody do, you either do stain or you do paint. You don't do both. But if you do both, you get this incredible depth of color and this old quality. And if you go up to it, you say, well, that's a mixture of material or whatever. That's it's not a perfect job. I didn't want a perfect job. I wanted Collinwood.
Is that what Cy Thomashoff did?
Same thing.
Same thing. Yeah.
Same exact thing.
Did you look
Same
at Cy Thomashoff's blueprints and his any kind of notes? Did Jim provide you with any of that stuff when you were?
Gave me everything. I had all the
That's great.
schematics. I had everything that he had on file.
Great.
And the hardest part was getting people to make sure it was exact,
Mhm.
because I would know if it wasn't exact,
Yeah.
and that would have bothered me.
Mhm.
Now, again, it was a budget that most people, if you were going to redo your room, okay, the room you're in, let's say you decide to just redo that room. God forbid we lose the artwork and the posters, right? But say you wanted a Collinwood door. All you have to do is get 2x4s in rectangles and a connecting piece, and then you have the Collinwood door.
Huh.
That's all it is. That's it. It's
Wow.
that simple. So other than that, I mean, there were certain nuances. The galley kitchen, I wanted that to again all have this feel like you were in the TV set of Collinwood. I wasn't really going for being at Seaview or being at Lyndhurst. I wanted to be in the set.
Yeah. Yep.
And so that's kind of what we did. And it was done on a very inexpensive budget. I mean, you'd
Yeah.
be surprised if I told you the
Mm.
actual costs. It's not unobtainable. It was lucky for me that we were able to build a big structure and have some land. Okay, that I was blessed and I was fortunate to be able to do. But other than that, it was just, I mean,
Yeah.
here was the toughest part of the whole project. There were two turrets, the one in front and the one on the side around the back.
Yep.
One's a smaller one, one's a bigger one. Excuse me, one's a tower, and there's two turrets.
Mhm.
But the tower was hard and the turret was hard because people today who build these things forgot how to make a round room.
Interesting.
Because
Wow.
nobody think about that. If today you buy a house,
Mhm.
they do this and this,
Yeah.
and it's angled. It's always like a bay window that's angled out. It's not round.
Hmm.
So the idea of, well, how did you do that? Well, first you have to cut the wood and you have to steam the wood in order to bend it slightly, and then you have to put it very close apart. Like normal studs are what, 12 inches apart, something like that, 16. We had to put them every 3 inches.
I see.
But if you put them every 3 inches, then you get this circular thing,
Hmm.
and then you cover it with like a plywood, and then that gets stucco. And it was all to code. That's the other thing. We have one of the toughest codes where I live in Allegheny County, and the house was, you know, really difficult because there's so much here that goes into fire safety, egress windows. Things had to be a certain size because there was a second and a third floor.
Hmm.
Um, and everything had to be exactly to code, whether it was even though we had all push button switches, they were modern push button switches. So there were no toggle switches in the house. They were actually, you push the button if you want the button on. And so, but I found a place that had those, and they were trying to get rid of them. They were safety rated. They had to work with today's wiring. They had to have the ground faults if something happens.
Hmm.
But I was able to get like 200 of these,
Hmm.
so that every light switch was a push button. So it was really just like going through trying to understand what could be built, because the house had to be built like a house would be built to code, but how we could aesthetically make it look
Right.
like
Now,
you're actually in Collinwood.
just to clarify, it's not the same size as Seaview Terrace, right? It's like a small, like smaller than,
It's roughly 40% the size of Seaview.
because Seaview is, if people have not been to Seaview, it is enormous. It is an
Right.
enormous building. So
It's longer,
okay,
but it's not taller.
I see. Okay.
And that's only longer because we had to put a car park in the middle, because
Uh-huh.
originally they were two houses.
Hmm.
It was the
Yep.
house, and then
Yep.
it was the other house I was building, and
Yeah.
then it was like, oh well, let's just connect them.
Which is kind of
And
what Seaview was too, because they have brought the two houses and kind of fused them together.
funny story, the guy who is one of my main lawyers,
Mhm.
his office was DuPont Circle in Washington.
Mhm.
His office space was where the original house stood.
No kidding. Wow. Huh.
And so it's the little things of synchronicity happen,
Yeah, it's
and
weird. That keeps happening to you. There's
always,
these
always.
interesting.
If you're
Wow.
open to it and aware of it and
Yeah.
thankful for it, good things usually happen, right?
Yeah,
But
totally. Yeah.
God, I mean, so and then the other piece of it, I'm trying to think of the only exact thing that I wanted to be exact was the tile floors were exactly what is at Seaview.
Mhm.
They're not the same quality, but they're exactly the same design.
Okay.
Up to the point where when Jim came to the house, the first thing I said to him after I painted a room to look like Quentin's room, and I got him a big, Victrola in there for him, and a cushy padded old chair, um, windows that had shutters.
Oh, great.
Um, I basically I said, now Jim, I need you to do one thing for me, since I got this room the way you want it. It's Quentin's room. He said, what's that? I said, you see this heavy silver tray? I want you to slam it down on the tile, just like Mrs. Johnson did in House of Dark Shadows. So we
Yes.
get it. So we get a chip that's still in the tile today.
Chip. Did it actually make a chip?
We have the
That's
exact chip.
amazing. Yeah, that chip is still there. If you go to Lyndhurst, it's still there. Yeah. Thanks.
So and again, because of Jim's knowledge and my attention to detail
Mhm.
and just creative sensibility for television,
Mhm.
we just I was lucky,
Yeah.
very
Did you put do you have the paintings too?
had all the paintings. Of course, no ego here. There may be some Barnabas portraits with my face around. No ego here.
You're
No.
talking to somebody who has a Penny Dreadful painting, so
By the way, and I meant to ask you, I love that. What happened to that show? I love that series they did. It
Oh,
was on.
The Showtime Penny Dreadful. It's actually that was written and created by John Logan, who's a friend and has been on the podcast. He got the name Penny Dreadful from the same place I did. I was the horror hostess, Penny Dreadful, showing creaky old horror films on local TV here, access television, but
Yeah,
we
yeah,
spread
yeah.
all over New England. We were on like 200 cities and towns and old UHF stations too. But the term Penny Dreadful comes from the 19th century, the serialized
That I
tales.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, much like Dark Shadows, actually. So I had been using that name as a horror host, and John actually got the name from the same place. And he's also a Dark Shadows fan. One day, I heard from him. It was on the Buy Me a Coffee, a little donation page I have for the podcast, and he donated to the podcast. He said, "Hey, this is John Logan, the creator of Penny Dreadful. Hi, Penny Dreadful." I said, "Oh my God, that's amazing." He's a big
Wow.
Dark Shadow, so invited him onto the podcast, and
That
yeah, he's
show,
great.
that
So
show was the closest thing it's what I thought at the time, what I thought a new Dark Shadow series should be.
John wanted to do Dark Shadows. He wanted to, but he didn't. The rights weren't available to Dark. It was tied up. So it might have. I don't remember if it was because of the depth. I'm not sure, but
I know
it
it
was.
was, yeah, the movie created problems for other
Yeah.
TV projects. I know that.
So he said, "Well, I'm just going to go to the source material that Dark Shadows used and all these classic characters," and he created an incredible show for those who have not seen the Penny Dreadful
That show
Showtime
was
series.
absolutely
Yeah.
like Dark Shadows again, but reimagined. I've always told Jim, and again, Jim Pierson, who deserves all the credit in the world
Mm.
for bringing Dark Shadows back, keeping Dark Shadows alive.
Yes. Yeah.
Not only did he work with his great idol, Dan Curtis, in making sure that those episodes got preserved, but also transferred and put out on video and then DVD and the festivals and caretaking all the artists. And I mean, Jim is just an amazing guy. And the fact that we shared our love for Dark Shadows, I was so into Doctor Who. He was a big Dark Shadows guy.
Yeah.
And as I got into Shadows, he couldn't have been more welcoming about it. And I'm just every day I'm really lucky to have spent all the time I have with him because all the knowledge he had, all the secret stories that maybe you read about, but you really don't know the true story to what happened.
Mhm.
Um, he knows them all.
And I would love for him to come on to the
Yeah.
podcast sometime and tell those stories. So we've been in touch in the past, and I'm going to reach out to Jim again because a lot of people ask me outside of the cast from the show. Jim is definitely up there in terms of requests of
He's
people.
very,
Him
he's
and the
shy,
blogger Danny Horn
very
too. I've had
unassuming,
on
very
too.
not at all, bombastic,
No,
self-promoting,
no,
nothing like that. And
no.
that's why probably he's a very shy guy,
Yeah, and that's what he told me too. So I'm more of a behind the scenes guy, but at some point, I'd love to have I told him the door is always open for you, Jim, whenever you want to come on. So at some point, that I would
because
love
I
for that
worked
to.
with him closely and he
Mhm,
would come and, spend, he lives in LA, but he would come to
mhm.
Pittsburgh
Yeah,
and spend weeks at a time and we'd work on our different TV shows. So we'd write them in the drawing room at Collinwood.
yeah, that's so cool. That's wild.
Yeah.
Well, you don't live there anymore now, right? Or do you still?
No, unfortunately, it became really too expensive
Mhm,
to keep up.
mhm,
The maintenance was a lot.
mhm,
And, after I think what really happened, it was really that we lost my parents and we lost my in-laws. And it really felt like walking through the empty halls that once
yeah,
were. And so we had to just move somewhere else.
yeah.
Close, but somewhere else. And
Mhm.
we had a guy there who really loved the property and didn't change a thing. And he was going to buy it, but he had some personal things. So I think it's actually going to go back on the market again.
Oh, okay.
But it's a wonderful opportunity if you have a lot of big people, a lot of big family, and so as your family gets smaller, it was kind of sad. It was sad to walk through these rooms and these doorways, and you have a memory of your dad or your mom,
Sure, I totally
your
get that.
father-in-law,
Yeah,
your mother-in-law.
yeah,
That was very hard. It was
yeah.
very, and so I felt like we needed to move on. We're lucky we lived there for 12 years.
Hmm.
Most people do that at the end of their lives.
Hmm.
I got to do it in the prime of my life, and so that was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience. But when I wrote all my TV shows, Jim Pierson and I wrote the majority of them together. We
Hmm.
always wrote them in our Collinwood.
That's
We
so cool.
didn't do
Wow.
it on the internet. We always just hunkered down for a week and just
Talk about being surrounded by inspiration. That's just super, super cool.
and that particular room was based on Lyndhurst. If you remember in Lyndhurst, that when they go into the great room there,
Yep.
um, they had the kind of the small closet doors, and behind this closet doors was, I guess, that whole room was built on at some point afterwards.
Okay.
So there's a room behind those closet doors, but they're very small, and they had transoms above them.
Hmm.
And so, in those transoms, you actually see the parts of the old house. And so that was a replica of that particular room
Hmm.
at Lyndhurst. So it was great. We would sit and we, talk a lot of Dark Shadow
Yeah.
stuff, and we
Cool.
would write these, probably over 200 TV shows we wrote in that room.
That's really cool. Did you
And
have the secret panel? And
I had many. In fact, I'll tell you a story. This is where you can edit this, right? So if I use some
yeah.
language, um, when I was building the house, I had many, many secret doors that led to secret tunnels that led to secret tunnels that led to secret doors that led to secret
Oh, I
rooms.
love it. Oh, that's so cool.
And so one day I was flying on an airplane, and this guy was talking to me about he was building, some house somewhere.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, what do you do?" He says, "Oh, I'm a psychiatrist and a psychologist." I said, "Oh, great. Well, we're stuck here in Overlay in DC. Do you mind shrinking me for a couple minutes?" He said, "Yeah, sure, I'll shrink you. I would, sure. I mean, yeah, I'll shrink you. Sure. Go ahead." I said, "I have this compulsion to build tunnels that lead to secret rooms, that lead to secret rooms, that lead to secret rooms, that then lead to tunnels that lead to secret rooms. And I have like these going all underneath my property." He said, "Yeah, you're fucking paranoid. That's what it is. You need you need places to hide." I said, "No, but I want people to know about my secret rooms. So I'm not trying to hide them unless they're in plain sight."
Wow.
Yeah, we had a lot of tunnels. A
Great.
lot of tunnels.
That's really cool. I want to ask one more question before we wrap up. We talked a lot about Dark Shadows and Doctor Who has had a second life. Well, it just keeps getting kind of reborn, but when it came back in recent years, it's been very successful. I guess Disney even owns Doctor Who now, apparently.
Distribution, yeah, distribution.
Distribution. Dark Shadows, yeah, I mean, we had the 91 series. There was the attempt at 2004. There was the 2012. They kept trying to kind of reboot the show, but they retell a lot of retelling the same story. And
That's a problem. Don't you think that's a problem?
I agree. I think it should be a
We all know
continuation.
this. We all know the story.
Yeah,
We know the story really well. It's time for some new stories that are going to attract younger people in the way that they're used to being told stories.
because
That's the only way it's going to come back again.
it sends them down the that's what Doctor Who did. It sent them down the rabbit hole to find the original stuff, because they like the new stuff and I'm like, oh, I want to find out what happened before this. I think that Dark Shadows needs that too.
I tell you what I think. And I told Jim this the other night. We were talking. I said,
Mhm.
listen, there needs to be, if there's ever going to be a new Dark Shadows, it shouldn't be called Dark Shadows, first of all. It should be called Collinwood.
Mhm.
And it's about things that happen at this house at Collinwood. And maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, we found out that there was once this vampire there, or
Yeah.
there was once a phoenix there,
Yeah.
or Humbert Allen Estrado was there. All these, we find all that stuff out, but it's got to tell its news stories in its own way. I thought the series he was working on, the CW series, which I've been lucky to see all of those, as well as the unedited Night of Dark Shadows and House of Dark Shadows,
Mhm.
Night of Dark Shadows. Still haven't seen that hanging scene with David, which I
Yeah,
swear I
that
saw as a kid.
a lot of people swear they saw it, but it seems to be missing.
But I think it should be the telling of young people, and then these links back to what happened before, and then it gets retold again.
Yeah.
But I think it should be Collinwood. But what do I know? I don't, doesn't matter what I think. But
No, I
I
think that's a
hope
great,
someone does
I
something.
agree with you. I mean, I think that's the way to go is have it now. Everything that happened in the original happened. And maybe then you start weaving some of that in. Maybe something that happened in the past is now affecting things in the present. But it's continuing the story. It needs its own next generation, Star Trek, the next generation kind of a thing, or like Doctor Who. It's the story continues on, but everything that happened prior to that still took place. It's still canon to the story, and they bring stuff back into over the years. They bring things back from the past into the present, but they're also telling new stories. I agree with you
Well, I'm getting
100%.
goosebumps on the back of my neck as you're saying that. So that's
Mm.
usually a an indication that we're on the right path there.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So it's just
I
hopefully
hope
it'll
someone
happen.
listens.
Somebody needs to give it a chance, is what it is. It's these the streaming channels now. There's so many of them, and there's so much content out there. But I think they're a combination of things. I think that the Burton film did hurt perception in some respects. I know there are fans of the film, but I think it didn't do well at the box office.
it made fun of the show in a
Yeah.
way. And I got to tell you, I mean, I had this argument with my daughter loves everything Broadway.
Mhm.
She's 19 years old, and she just
Mhm.
loves Broadway, and her mom try to go to Broadway and Broadway shows as much as possible. And they love the name I won't mention, which is Helena Bonham Carter.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, "Why do you not like her?" And I'm like, "Because it seems like, liking B. Arthur and Grayson, like she thinks that would be because she ruined Julia. She
Yeah.
ruined Julia.
She also made fun of the original show publicly quite a bit in interviews and stuff, which I was not a fan of that. But
She could have done an incredible Julia. She could
yeah,
have.
yeah.
It was not cool the way they went.
No,
And, that's part of the reason I just,
I think that's part of what's hurting it, but also I think the cost of Dark Shadows would be an expensive show to do. And I think that that's problematic as well because people are afraid people work with these streaming channels. I think they're afraid to take a risk on it, and they shouldn't be. I mean, they're doing all these other shows, like gosh, House of Usher, I guess recently. They will produce these types of shows. Stranger Things is very successful. All of these sort of horror,
you know
fantasy,
what it
sci-fi
may be
shows.
though, it may very well be, Penny, that those things all had a great life in England.
Mm,
And Dark Shadows never really hit in England.
yeah,
It never took off.
that's true.
Their Sci-Fi Channel aired it, but it never, for whatever reason, it just never. You'd
Yeah.
think it would have, but
It
it
has a
didn't.
following, but it's not. It's like Stuart Manning was kind of the head. I don't know if you know Stuart, but it's a smaller group of fans for sure. You would think
But
it would, though. You're right. Yeah.
all that other stuff originates from there generally, and all the good actors really are,
Mm,
from there.
yeah. A lot. Yeah.
And you'd have to have some stunt casting. You'd have to have some famous Broadway people, stage actors in Broadway now, that would bring some of these young kids into it. And you have to have storytelling that relates to these young
Mm.
kids. And um,
Stage actors and people with gravitas like Jonathan Frid or Thayer David or Grayson that have a presence, and younger actors that come from the stage too, like Catherine did. I think that combination would work really well. Have some like unknowns in key roles. I think that would be pretty cool. But
I mean, there's a few people that you see once in a while. Who I always thought would have made a great Julia because she sounded like her was Angela Cartwright's sister, she's older now, but she's got Julia's exact voice. So she was someone. And then, you think like even a Jeff
Eileen
Goldblum.
Brennan. I was thinking of Eileen
Oh
Brennan.
yeah,
Sorry.
she would have been. You think like a Jeff Goldblum, if he wanted to, could
Yeah.
nail. He could nail that if he wanted
To
to.
nail what?
He could nail Jonathan Frid. I think he really,
Goldblum. Yeah.
if he wanted to. But
But
you've got to have some. I mean, look, Ben Cross was inspired when you think about it.
he was
So I
great.
don't know. I don't know.
But
What am I? I'm just a guy who looks at Jonathan every day and lights a candle in his honor.
as we all should. TJ, I want to thank you for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Thank you for taking the time and sharing your story, which is you're no longer in the dark shadows. Now you are in the dark shadows always, but still now we know who you are.
The thing about living in Pittsburgh, I'll leave you with this, is that you can wear Inverness cloaks and nobody gives you, particularly this time of year where it's really cold, nobody gives you like a bat's an eye. They're
There you
like,
go.
you
Yeah.
can just get away with walking down the street in a charcoal gray Inverness cloak.
And I'm glad you said it's charcoal gray because when I did the I'm going to show you this. We're running out of time, but this bugs me. So they made this Barnabas
Yes.
figure and he looks like Count Chocula. They
Yeah.
put him in, I remember sometimes he wore a brown suit in the show occasionally, but his Inverness coat is not brown. It should have been like charcoal gray, dark black, charcoal gray color.
I had them bespoke. I had them made. Both the
Cool.
ones with the one with the fur and the regular one.
Mm-hmm.
And also the green one, from
Mhm.
1795.
Sure.
Because the good thing about those Inverness cloaks, I really do wear them like
Mm-hmm.
all the time. Is that because I'm a Doctor Who fan, one of the earlier doctors. Now I'm a Tom Baker guy, but before him was a great actor named John Pertwee.
John
He
Pertwee.
also
Sure.
wore Inverness cloaks as well.
Yeah.
So I was able to satisfy both of my
Great.
left and right sides.
Awesome. Well, hey, folks, please check out Lubinsky Live on mixcloud.com. I'll put a link to that in the show notes so you can listen to some really cool music on TJ's show. I look forward to checking that out. TJ, thank you again for joining me. It's been fun talking with you, and hopefully we'll have you back sometime. And Jim too. If we want to have Jim on sometime, it'll be a great time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. It's having fun geeking out talking about dark shadows. I mean.
And for as long as they lived, the dark shadows never truly vanished, for there will always be terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.